On August 1st, 1589, a friar named Jacques Clement talked his way into a private meeting with the King of France. He leaned in, promising a vital secret, but instead of whispering, he buried a dagger deep in the king's stomach. That king was Henry III, the last of the Valois dynasty, and his murder was the bloody finale to a reign drowning in scandal and controversy. He was a king people knew more for his obsession with pearls, perfumes, and parties than for politics or war. His enemies called him a heretic, a tyrant, and, most damningly, a man who lived like a woman. So, how does a king of France get so hated that a monk thinks killing him is God's work? How did a haircut and a string of pearls become weapons in a brutal civil war? To get it, we have to go all the way back. Henry was born Alexander Edouard in 1551, the fourth son of King Henry II and the legendary Catherine de' Medici. As the fourth son, nobody ever expected him to rule France. He was his mother's absolute favorite. She called him her chers yeux, or precious eyes, and smothered him with affection that made his older brothers burn with resentment. And from a young age, Henry was different. While the other court boys were out jousting, Henry was inside, reading poetry and history. He had a flair for the dramatic and a fascination with fashion that really made him stand out. His childhood was thrown into the chaos of the French wars of religion, a savage back and forth between Catholics and Protestants, the Huguenots, that was tearing the country in two. And for all his later reputation as being effeminate, the young Henry, then called the Duke of Anjou, was actually a damn good military commander, winning major victories against the Huguenots. But his road to the throne was a strange one. In 1573, he got himself elected king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, basically a French power play. He couldn't have been less interested in Poland. So when his brother, King Charles IX of France, died a year later, Henry saw his opening. In a move that shocked everyone, he literally fled Poland in the middle of the night to claim the French crown. The story spread that he disguised himself in women's clothing to escape. While that's most likely a juicy rumor his enemies made up, it tells you what kind of stories were already sticking to him. He returned to a kingdom on the verge of total collapse. Henry III's coronation basically set the tone for his entire reign. He actually complained that the crown would mess up his hair and demanded a different one. He showed up wearing a pearl-studded robe that looked more like a gown, which scandalized half the nobility. Right from the start, it was obvious Henry's court was going to be something else. He was trying to rule a France split into three camps: the Huguenots, led by his cousin Henry of Navarre; the fanatical Catholic League, run by the powerful Henry I, Duke of Guise; and his own royalist party, desperately trying to find a middle ground. In a time that screamed for a tough, warrior king, Henry gave them fashion. He was obsessed with art, luxury, and throwing the most extravagant parties imaginable. But nothing defined his court more than his male favorites, a crew of handsome young noblemen nicknamed the Mignons, which means darlings or dainties. Henry showered these guys with money, titles, and affection. The famous diarist Pierre de l'Estoile wrote that the Mignons wore their hair long, curled, and recurled by artifice, with little bonnets of velvet on top of it like whores in the brothels. Their ruffled collars were so huge, he said, that their heads looked like St. John's on a platter. Henry himself was said to show up at parties dressed as a woman, wearing a collar of pearls, just like the ladies of the court. This was seen as a shocking betrayal of what a king should be. A king was meant to project raw, masculine power. Henry seemed more interested in setting trends. To many, his court was decadent, corrupt, and dangerously soft. In the toxic, paranoid air of 16th century France, Henry's unique style became the perfect weapon for his enemies. Both the Protestants and the ultra-Catholics of the Catholic League launched a ruthless propaganda war against him, using the cutting-edge technology of the day, the printing press. Vicious pamphlets and crude, satirical drawings spread through Paris like wildfire. These weren't just schoolyard insults. They were political attacks designed to destroy his authority by questioning his very manhood. They accused him of everything. He was a sodomite, sleeping with his Mignons. He was a cross-dresser who secretly wanted to be a woman. Some pamphlets even called him a hermaphrodite, a freak of nature. The goal was to paint him as deviant, weak, and morally rotten, a king who had abandoned his masculinity and was therefore unfit to rule a Christian country. Historians still debate the truth about Henry's sexuality. Some argue it was all a political smear, noting he had several mistresses. Others think it's more complicated, and that his intense, emotional bonds with the Mignons suggest a life that didn't fit the neat boxes of his time. When one of his favorites was killed in a duel, Henry was apparently beyond consolation, kissing his friend's lifeless face and cutting locks of his hair. But in the end, the truth didn't matter. It was the perception that did. By painting him as effeminate, his enemies convinced a huge chunk of France that their king wasn't just bad, but an abomination. And all this propaganda? It worked. Brilliantly. Henry's authority started to collapse. It didn't help that he couldn't produce an heir. He married Louise of Lorraine in 1575, but they remained childless, a fact his enemies used as more proof of his supposed unnaturalness. With no son, the Valois dynasty was dying out, and the crisis over who would rule next made the religious divide even worse. By law, the next in line was the Protestant leader, Henry of Navarre, a thought that horrified the Catholic League. The League's leader, the handsome and popular Duke of Guise, styled himself as the true defender of Catholicism. As Henry III's popularity tanked, the Duke skyrocketed. It all blew up in May 1588 on the day of the barricades. The people of Paris, whipped into a frenzy by the League, rose up for the Duke of Guise. Henry III, the King of France, was forced to flee his own capital in total humiliation. Backed into a corner, Henry made a ruthless decision. That December, he invited the Duke of Guise and his brother, a cardinal, to a meeting at the Château de Blois. It was a trap. Royal guards ambushed and murdered both men. While it took out his main rival, the act was seen as pure tyranny. Instead of making him stronger, it turned most of Catholic France murderously against him. The propaganda now had its ultimate proof. Henry wasn't just a deviant. He was a murderous tyrant. Okay, quick pause. If you're into this wild mix of political backstabbing, propaganda, and royal drama, do me a favor and hit that like button. It's the best way to tell YouTube you need more twisted history in your life. The assassination of the Guise brothers basically signed Henry's death warrant. He was a total outcast, forced into an unthinkable alliance with the very man he'd been fighting, the Protestant Henry of Navarre. The two Henrys marched their armies to the edge of Paris, ready to lay siege to the city that had rejected its king. It was there, at St. Cloud, that the propaganda war reached its bloody conclusion. The friar, Jacques Clement, was a creation of years of this relentless messaging. He and other fanatics were convinced by the Catholic League that killing the king wasn't a sin, but a holy act. He was murdering villain Herods, a common anagram of Henri de Valois, used in the pamphlets, a tyrant who had betrayed God and France. As Henry III lay dying, he did one last thing to secure the future of his kingdom. He officially named Henry of Navarre his rightful successor. With his last breath, the last Valois king paved the way for the Bourbon dynasty, a move that would eventually, finally, end the wars of religion. But he wouldn't see it. Henry III died on August 2, 1589. His assassin was killed on the spot by the guards, his body later quartered and burned. To the Catholic League, Clement was a martyr. To history, he was the human dagger forged by a smear campaign. Henry III of France is still one of history's most misunderstood kings. The history books weren't kind to him, mostly because they were written by his enemies, who loved to contrast his decadent reign with the macho image of his successor, Henry IV. He's remembered not for trying to find peace in a country tearing itself apart, but for his scandalous court, his love of luxury, and the vicious rumors about his private life. His story is a chilling reminder of how identity and even personal style can be turned into a weapon. At a moment of crisis, Henry's refusal to act like a normal king was used to strip him of all legitimacy. He wasn't the only French royal to play with gender norms. The Chevalier d'Anne would later become famous for living as both a man and a woman. But Henry's story is a masterclass in how nonconformity can be twisted to justify rebellion and even regicide. So what's your take? Was Henry III a tragic victim of a brilliant smear campaign? A man whose love for beauty was used as a fatal flaw? Or was he a self-indulgent ruler whose own actions sealed his fate? Let me know what you think down in the comments. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more twisted tales from the thrones of history.